How to remember everything you read. In this video, I'll teach you a system for remembering everything you read, study, or learn. I've been using the system for the last several years, starting from learning science in school to reading research articles or reading books on productivity or business. The reason the system works so consistently and so well is that it breaks down the process of reading into two distinct stages. The first stage is the consumption period, and the second is the digestion period. Most people think that by focusing on the first stage and consuming more information, they'll be able to remember and apply more information. So they focus on trying to read faster or watching lectures at high speed, binge listening to audiobooks, or watching hours of YouTube tutorials. But that is not how learning works. Once we understand how learning works, you'll see why my system is so effective. When it comes to remembering and applying information, it's much less about what comes into your brain and much more about how much stays in your brain. That is what the second stage, the digestion period, is all about. And it's the part that is often neglected. I'll teach you a system for mastering both of these stages, which increases your retention and ability to use the knowledge in the way you need to. But first, we need to ask ourselves, is it even possible to remember everything you read? The short answer is no. But here's the secret. Trying to remember everything we read should not be the goal in the first place. We know this because of a man who could actually remember everything. His name is Kim Peek, and his story is so extraordinary that Hollywood made a movie about him. Kim Peek was a mega genius, and his memory was remarkable. He could memorize a book with perfect recall after reading it one time. He could write it out word for word, including punctuation. He memorized so many maps and atlases that he could give you driving directions between any two cities in the world, calculating the shortest distance mentally. Kim Peek had such abilities due to a rare medical condition called FG syndrome. FG syndrome is a genetic condition that affects many parts of the body and occurs almost exclusively in males. FG syndrome affects intelligence and behavior. He was born with a larger brain and no corpus callosum, the bundle of neurons that connects both brain hemispheres. Scientists believe that because of this, his brain adapted by developing new connections, giving him superhuman memory. Now imagine that both you and Kim Peek were to sit the same exam. Who would do better? The answer depends on the exam. Despite his superhuman memory, Kim Peek struggled with reasoning and problem solving. If the exam involved lower levels of learning, like memorization and recall, Kim Peek would excel. But if it involved reasoning and higher level problem solving, you might have the edge. For most of us, using knowledge to reason and solve problems is the goal of learning in the first place. So it is not enough to remember everything, which is good because it's impossible for most people. However, it is possible to remember everything you need in a way that allows you to use the knowledge effectively. That is what this system helps you achieve. To start using the system, we must understand that not all information is equal. I break down information into 5 categories using the acronym PESA. It's important to identify which category the information you're reading belongs to, because each category has targeted processes that help you manage the information more effectively. When we use the wrong process for a specific category of information, it makes remembering and understanding harder, more time-consuming, and less effective. You are more likely to forget what you read, and you're also more likely to enter the passive mode of reading, where you get to the bottom of the page and can't even remember what you just read. The system works like this. In the first part, while consuming information, we identify which category it belongs to using the PESA acronym. Then during stage 2, we digest what we have read using the targeted process for that category, which stores it in long-term memory through the process of encoding. Let's go through PESA together so that you can identify the category of information you're trying to remember. The P in PESA stands for procedural. Procedural information tells you how something should be executed. For example, a medical book teaching clinical examinations, like listening to a heartbeat, involves procedural information. To master this type of information, the targeted process is practice. You should apply procedural information in real life as early as possible. However, if you're reading something and don't have time to practice it right away, you either move on to something else or stop consuming more information until you have time to practice. Learning requires balancing the two stages of consuming and digesting. Everything you consume must be digested for you to retain and use it. Only when stage 1 is followed by stage 2 does learning occur. If we don't have time to apply the right process, consuming more leads to forgetting, mental vomiting, which is why most people forget the majority of what they read. Instead of consuming more, it makes more sense to spend more time digesting and processing what you've already consumed. This principle of balancing, consuming, and digesting applies not just to procedural information, but to every category of PESA. The A in PESA stands for analogous. Analogous information is related to something you already know. For example, learning about muscle contraction might remind you of swimming techniques. Creating analogies helps you understand and remember new information by relating it to what you already know. When we identify analogous information, the targeted process is critique. Critiquing the analogy means examining how well it works and in what ways it breaks down. This process deepens understanding and retention. Although the system might feel forced at first, understanding its structure is essential for mastering the material you read. It works if you have no time pressure, and it doesn't matter how well you learn something, then you can learn and read however you want. But unfortunately, what research has shown is that there are clear biological limitations of the human brain to how much it can consume and store into our memory in one go. In the modern day, when there is so much we have to learn, it is very easy to exceed that biological limit and get overwhelmed. Learning is extremely complicated, so to be able to learn a lot in a short amount of time and reach a high level of knowledge, many processes need to go right. This is why most people will plateau in their learning ability, and after a point, not really improve for the rest of their lives. For me, figuring out which processes to care about, what to improve on, and how to execute those correctly took me at least several years of almost constant experimentation, reading and research to see what works. Now, getting back to PESA. The next category of information, which is the C, stands for conceptual. If procedural information is the how-to of something, conceptual information is the what. For most science subjects, the majority of what you need to learn is conceptual. Conceptual information includes facts, explanations, theories, principles, relationships between concepts, and how a concept can be applied. In most cases, we need both procedural and conceptual knowledge to solve a problem and apply our knowledge properly. For example, although a book might go through how to listen to someone's heart, you still need to have the conceptual knowledge of what you're listening to in order to analyze it and make a diagnosis. So, when identifying that a piece of text is conceptual information, the process to use straight away is mapping. Nonlinear, network-based note-taking, such as mind mapping, is an efficient way to increase your attention and mastery of conceptual knowledge because it inherently exists in a network. Although a textbook or lecture may be delivered word by word in a linear format, the mind and knowledge of the person who wrote that textbook do not exist in a sentence-by-sentence structure. Their knowledge is a highly connected network of information. There is no inherent sequence to the information. An expert can start at any point and navigate to any other. This ability allows an expert to solve complex problems because they can understand the concepts and how they connect. A beginner, on the other hand, may see separate concepts without understanding their links. As learners, our job is not to memorize word-for-word sequences, but to recreate the expert's knowledge network. Mapping is a great technique because it forces us to think about each fact and concept and how they connect to form a bigger picture. When reading or consuming information, take time to get a piece of paper or tablet and create a map of what you are learning. As you read more, add to your map, move things around, and reorganize them. The more you read, the more you digest, and your map grows. Analogous information can also exist within conceptual information, so you may find opportunities to create analogies and add those to your map as well. Even if the analogy doesn't make it into the map, it might give you ideas about how to structure your thoughts. Now, what if you're reading but don't have time to draw a map? Or you don't have anything to map on while reading? In that case, you need to slow down and consume less so that your consumption and digestion can stay balanced. If you don't, you'll end up overwhelmed, forgetting much of what you consumed, and ultimately wasting time. In the future, you will have more work trying to figure out what was forgotten, and then having to relearn it anyway. The good news is that digesting procedural, analogous, and conceptual information is the most time-consuming part. The E and R in PESA are much faster and easier to handle. I'll talk about these together because they're very similar, but pay attention. They're so similar that most people don't distinguish between the two, which can lead to wasted time. The E in PESA stands for evidence. Evidence-type information is what helps make conceptual information more concrete. These are often detailed and technical pieces of information that can be useful as facts, statistics, or case studies to prove a conceptual point. For example, we might conceptually understand how World War I started, but we also need evidence such as specific dates, events, and locations to make the concept more concrete. The key process for dealing with evidence-type information is to store and rehearse. Store means to collect and note the information, adding it to a conceptual map, a second brain system like Notion, Roam, or Obsidian, or flashcards. This should happen immediately after identifying the information. Rehearse happens later at a scheduled time and involves thinking about how to apply the information, whether through solving problems, writing answers, or teaching the material. The last type of information in PESA is reference information, which refers to very specific, detailed bits that don't change your conceptual understanding. These could be things like the exact value of a constant, the name of a molecule, or a gene involved in a mutation. Like evidence, reference-type information is stored and rehearsed, often with flashcards using spaced repetition strategies like Anki. This allows for quick fact recall when needed. While reading, it's important not to waste time trying to memorize reference information as you read. Instead, prioritize the first 3 types: procedural, analogous, and conceptual, because they form the foundation of knowledge that evidence and reference information build upon. In summary, understanding and properly categorizing the 5 types of information, procedural, analogous, conceptual, evidence, and reference, allows for more efficient learning. Balancing the consumption and digestion of this information is key to retaining a high level of knowledge over time. Another thing I want to say is that when you are in a lecture or reading a book, don't take notes right away. Focus on listening or reading first. After the lecture or reading, write down what you remember. This helps your brain practice remembering. A student said that at their university, lectures were recorded, and one teacher had a big clock in the classroom. He suggested that students should write down the time when something important was said, instead of taking full notes during the lecture. Then, when they went home, they could use the times they wrote down to find those parts in the recorded lecture. This method helped students remember better, and many did well in his class. For books, don't underline or highlight while you read. Instead, read a few paragraphs or a chapter, then close the book, think about what you read, and write down what you remember in your own words. This helps you understand and remember the information better. Some people ask how teachers remember so much when they speak. It's because they read and think deeply about the ideas, connecting them to what they already know. After reading, try to explain what you've learned as if you're telling it to someone else. This helps you remember it better. Remember, reading is like digestion. Do not eat too much. Take time to digest and absorb the information to become a part of you. Poop the rest. Thank you for joining us today. If you have other tips that helped you, let us know in the comment. It might also help another person. I hope you enjoy these tips. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you in the next video.